Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless Official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The shocking revelation that Sienna Bacall and a mysterious man named Burrow are Claire's biological parents doesn't just rattle Genoa City, it detonates a chain of events so explosive that every major family finds themselves dragged into a nightmare that seems almost too twisted to be true. Yet the evidence mounts with chilling precision, leaving Claire reeling from betrayal, fear, and confusion, especially when she discovers that Sienna and Burrow's plans go far beyond her origins and are tied to a sinister plot that involves Noah Newman, who suddenly becomes the target of a ruthless kidnapping scheme meant to protect a secret so dangerous it could collapse the Newman empire if it ever came to light. And as Claire stands on the edge of unraveling the truth, she finds herself torn between the family that raised her and the strangers who claim to have created her, both sides pulling her deeper into a war of lies, deception, and power that blurs every line she thought she knew, because Sienna Bacall is not merely a lost figure from the past but a calculating woman with an agenda that spans decades, a woman who claims Victor Newman himself played a hand in tearing her life apart, insisting that she and Burrow were forced into hiding after their daughter, Claire, was stolen from them at birth under circumstances so murky that even medical records appear altered, names erased, and witnesses silenced, all pointing to a cover-up that implicates both Victor and Nikki, leaving Claire horrified to wonder if her entire identity was built on a foundation of lies. And while she is already trying to process this bombshell, Sienna reveals that Noah Newman holds the key to the entire story, his kidnapping not random but deliberate, orchestrated by Burrow to ensure that the Newman family cannot suppress the truth any longer, because locked away in an encrypted set of documents that only Noah has access to lies the real history of Claire's birth, records that connect Sienna and Burrow to a web of crimes, betrayals, and hidden alliances that stretch across continents, revealing ties to old Newman enemies and proving that Claire's existence was the result of a dangerous deal gone wrong, a deal that Victor spent years burying. And now with Noah held captive in a hidden safe house, Claire faces the most devastating choice of her life, whether to help Sienna and Burrow expose the Newmans and reclaim her stolen legacy or to save Noah by betraying the people who call themselves her parents, a dilemma made worse by the fact that every hour Noah remains missing, the danger escalates, and whispers circulate that Burrow may not intend to keep him alive once he gets what he wants, forcing Claire into a desperate race against time as Nick, Sharon, and Mariah band together with Victor and Nikki to track Noah down, though tensions boil over as accusations fly, secrets unravel, and the family fractures under the weight of suspicion, with Victor refusing to admit any role in Sienna's story while Nikki privately trembles at memories she thought long buried, memories that hint there may indeed be truth to Sienna's claims, memories of a night when a desperate woman begged for help and was instead silenced by Newman power, leaving Nikki haunted and uncertain whether her silence back then contributed to the nightmare now unfolding. And as Claire confronts Sienna directly, demanding answers about why she would kidnap Noah if she truly wanted a relationship with her daughter, Sienna drops the most staggering revelation yet, that Noah himself is not just a pawn but is tied to Claire in ways nobody imagined, for his encrypted files don't just contain medical records of her stolen birth but also a confession from someone within the Newman inner circle who knew the truth and recorded it for safekeeping. A confession that proves Victor orchestrated a black market adoption scheme decades ago to protect his empire from scandal, and that Claire was the child who paid the price, stolen and discarded until Sienna clawed her way back into the picture. And though Claire wants desperately to deny it, the puzzle pieces begin to align too perfectly to ignore, forcing her to confront the horrifying possibility that her life with the Newmans has been a carefully maintained illusion, while Noah, trapped in Burrow's clutches, fights for his life and clings to hope that Claire will find him before it's too late. But as the clock ticks down, the pressure mounts. Alliances shift, and the truth threatens to burn everything to the ground, leaving the stage set for a fiery confrontation where Sienna and Burrow demand Claire choose a side, the Newmans brace for exposure, and Noah's fate hangs in the balance, with every whisper suggesting that by the time this secret is fully revealed, Genoa City will never be the same again. Noah Newman's captivity was not some dimly lit cliché of locked basements and crude restraints, it was calculated, cold, and unnervingly meticulous, orchestrated by Burrow with a kind of military precision that revealed just how long this plan had been brewing. and as Noah sat in the soundproofed warehouse room, wrists bound but otherwise untouched, he couldn't escape the sickening realization that his captors weren't just criminals, they were people who knew too much about his family, too much about him, and that meant this wasn't just about ransom or leverage, it was about history, buried sins, and an unrelenting vendetta that was now using him as the hinge on which the entire Newman empire might swing open and collapse, because while Burrow played the role of enforcer, pacing with a steady, measured presence that kept Noah on edge, it was Sienna who controlled the atmosphere, stepping into the room with a calmness that chilled Noah more than Burrow's physical dominance, her voice soft, persuasive, almost maternal as she leaned in close and whispered that none of this was about hurting him but about freeing the truth, assuring him that in the end, even he would see why this had to happen, and though Noah resisted, demanding to be released, his protests rang hollow when she placed a folder in front of him, filled with documents stamped with Newman insignias, altered birth certificates, medical transfers, and sealed court records that bore his family's name, leaving Noah shaken as he realized that not only did Sienna and Burrow have inside knowledge, they had evidence that could destroy Victor, Nikki, and the legacy he had grown up believing was untouchable, and what terrified him most was that he knew, deep down, some of it looked legitimate, too detailed to be fabricated, too exact to dismiss, which made him question if Claire, the cousin he had only recently begun to trust, was truly caught in the middle or if she had been a plant in their lives all along, a pawn waiting for the right moment to expose their vulnerabilities, and while Noah wrestled with this fear, Claire herself was unraveling in Genoa City. Caught between desperate family members and the siren call of Sienna's manipulations, because despite Victor's thunderous denials and Nikki's fragile silence, something inside her ached at Sienna's words, a primal pull that whispered she might finally be face to face with the woman who had given her life, and the more Sienna pressed with stories of a young mother forced into the shadows, a woman stripped of her child by Victor's ruthless ambition, the more Claire began to question her loyalty to the family she had only recently begun to bond with, her heart torn apart by images of what might have been, and it didn't help that every Newman seemed to be fracturing under the pressure, Nick storming into Victor's office demanding answers only to be shut down, Sharon breaking down in tears over her missing son, Mariah lashing out at anyone who tried to minimize the danger, and Summer, in a shocking move, blaming Claire outright for the kidnapping, insisting that none of this would be happening if Claire hadn't wormed her way into their family, which left Claire shattered, alone, and teetering on the edge of making a decision that could either save Noah or doom him forever, because Sienna and Burrow weren't simply dangling his life as collateral, they were promising her a family of her own, promising her the truth she had been denied, and for someone who had always struggled with belonging, the temptation was excruciating, and as days passed, Victor's fury boiled over into ruthless action, hiring private investigators, unleashing Newman security, and pressuring old contacts to locate Burrow, yet every lead ended in a dead end, every trace evaporated, as if Burrow had anticipated Victor's every move, which only deepened Victor's rage, and in private moments, Nikki confessed to Nick that she feared this was all coming back to haunt them because years ago, when Claire was just a baby, she had indeed heard whispers of Sienna, a desperate woman who claimed Victor had destroyed her life, and though Nikki had dismissed it as rantings at the time, the look in Sienna's eyes had never left her, a look of unrelenting determination that now seemed eerily familiar in Claire, making Nikki question if she had unwittingly stood by as an innocent mother was stripped of her child, and if that was true, then the Newmans were not the victims here, they were the villains, and that guilt ate at her as she clutched her rosary late at night, praying for Noah's safe return but knowing that prayers might not be enough against the kind of rage Sienna carried, because Sienna wasn't seeking redemption, she was seeking retribution, and Noah was her instrument to crack open the empire that had crushed her, yet even within captivity, Noah found his own strength, refusing to break under Burrow's intimidation, using every moment alone to study their movements, the exits, the timing of meals, the subtle shifts in Sienna's tone when she spoke of Claire, realizing that their greatest weakness wasn't the locked door or the guards outside but Claire herself, because it was clear to him that Sienna's entire plan hinged on pulling Claire to her side, convincing her that the Newmans were the enemy, and if Claire could resist, if Claire could see through the manipulation, then maybe he stood a chance, but if Claire faltered, if she gave in to the intoxicating idea of finally belonging to parents who claimed to love her, then Noah's fate was sealed, and Genoa City would never recover from the fallout, so when he was finally able to smuggle out a message scratched onto a scrap of paper and slipped beneath the bindings of his shoe during a moment of inattention, he prayed it would find its way into the right hands, that Claire would see it before it was too late, because the words he scrawled weren't just a plea for help, they were a warning that the biggest secret of all was still buried, that Sienna and Burrow's vendetta went beyond Claire's stolen birth. Beyond Victor's sins, into something darker, something tied to an old Newman rival who had vanished years ago, a rival whose fingerprints were now emerging in the shadows of this plot, and if the Newmans didn't piece it together soon, they would all be blindsided by a truth that made Claire's parentage look like the smallest twist in a web of betrayals that had been decades in the making. Noah's smuggled warning landed not in Victor's iron grip or Nick's desperate hands but in Claire's trembling fingers, intercepted by chance when she spotted an envelope tucked inside a package that had been anonymously delivered to the Abbott estate where she had been hiding out since Summer's vicious accusations, and as she slid the paper open and read Noah's scrawled plea, her heart slammed in her chest with such ferocity she had to steady herself against the counter, because the words weren't simply a cry for help, they were an encrypted breadcrumb trail, a set of numbers and initials she recognized as access codes to Noah's private server, a digital vault where he stored the kind of evidence no one else in Genoa City could touch, and as Claire typed the sequence into her laptop, the files unfolded like a Pandora's box of horror, revealing document after document that confirmed Sienna's story of her stolen birth but also exposed something infinitely darker, a decades-old alliance between Burrow and one of Victor's oldest enemies, Ashland Locke, whose supposed death had never been as clean as the world believed, because within those files were sealed financial transfers, offshore accounts, and hidden communications that suggested Ashland had orchestrated his own downfall and gone underground, biding his time with allies like Burrow, grooming Sienna into a weapon of vengeance, and positioning Claire as the ultimate tool to dismantle the Newmans, meaning her entire life had been engineered not by accident or fate but by a calculated plan to inject chaos into Victor's empire, and that realization made Claire's stomach twist with nausea as she stared at her reflection in the screen, questioning if she was a daughter or a pawn, a victim or a weapon, and before she could even process, her phone buzzed with a blocked number. It was Sienna, her voice low and firm, insisting that time had run out, that if Claire wanted to save Noah, she had to come to the warehouse and hear the full truth face to face, but Claire, still reeling from Noah's files, knew this was no simple reunion, it was a trap designed to pull her into Sienna's web once and for all, so she made the only decision she could. She copied the files onto a drive, slipped it into her jacket, and called Nick, her voice shaking as she told him that if he wanted Noah back alive, he had to trust her enough to let her walk straight into the lion's den, and though Nick balked, furious that she would risk herself, the desperation in her voice silenced him, forcing him to realize that the only one who could pierce Sienna's armor was Claire herself, because bloodlines were a currency Sienna valued above all else, and if there was even a sliver of maternal truth in her claims, she wouldn't harm the daughter she had clawed her way back to find, and so with Nick shadowing her from afar and Victor reluctantly allowing a small strike team to hover nearby, Claire entered the abandoned warehouse where Noah was being held, her heart pounding so violently she thought her chest might burst, and what she found inside was a tableau that would haunt her forever. Noah, bruised but alive, tied to a chair in the center of the room, Burrow looming in the shadows like a soldier awaiting orders, and Sienna, poised and serene, as though the chaos outside was merely background noise to her carefully orchestrated play, and when her eyes landed on Claire, they softened with a frightening kind of warmth, the warmth of a mother who had been waiting decades for this moment, as she stretched out her arms and said, "My daughter, you finally came home," words that sent a chill through Claire's spine because they were both everything she had longed to hear and everything she feared most, and when Claire tried to speak of Noah, demanding his release, Sienna silenced her with a raised hand, insisting that Noah was safe so long as Claire listened, and then the floodgates opened. Sienna launched into a monologue of betrayal and survival, recounting the night Claire was taken, the doctors bribed, the records falsified, Victor's alleged hand in erasing her identity, Burrow's loyalty in smuggling Sienna into hiding, and Ashland's shadowy presence pulling the strings from afar, painting herself as both victim and avenger, a woman who had clawed her way back from ruin not only to reclaim her child but to dismantle the empire that had stolen everything from her, and as she spoke, Claire's mind swirled with images of Nikki's haunted eyes, Victor's furious denials, and Noah's desperate warning, all colliding into a storm of doubt, and it was in that moment that Burrow stepped forward with a flash drive of his own, slamming it onto the table and telling Claire that everything she needed to see, every proof of Victor's corruption, every deal Ashland had brokered to stay alive, was contained inside, daring her to insert it and learn the truth for herself. But before she could move, Noah shouted hoarsely, "Don't. It's a trap. They'll use you just like they used me," his voice cracking with urgency, and the raw fear in his tone rattled Claire more than Sienna's controlled serenity ever could, because it reminded her that Noah wasn't just a cousin, he was her blood too, her connection to the Newman family she had been yearning to accept, and in his desperation she saw something genuine, something worth saving. But Sienna, sensing her hesitation, shifted tactics, softening her gaze and speaking of cradle songs and sleepless nights, painting vivid pictures of what their life could have been, tugging at Claire's deepest wounds, and for a split second Claire faltered, her hand trembling toward the drive, until the memory of Noah's warning echoed in her head, that the greatest enemy wasn't Sienna or Burrow but the phantom pulling their strings, the specter of Ashland Locke who had somehow escaped death and was orchestrating this from the shadows, and it hit her with blinding clarity that if she allowed herself to be swayed, she would not only betray Noah and the Newmans, she would hand Ashland Locke the very victory he had been craving since the day he first declared war on Victor, and with that realization, Claire straightened her shoulders, locked eyes with Sienna, and for the first time in her life spoke with the authority of a Newman and a Bacall combined, declaring that she would no longer be anyone's pawn, not Victor's, not Nikki's, not Sienna's, and certainly not Ashland's, a declaration that shattered the delicate balance in the room, because Sienna's face twisted from warmth to rage in an instant, her outstretched arms curling into fists as she hissed that Claire was blind, that she was choosing lies over truth, and Burrow moved toward Noah, ready to silence him permanently, but before he could strike, the warehouse doors exploded open as Nick and Victor's team stormed inside, chaos erupting in a blur of gunfire, shouts, and desperate struggle, and in the frenzy, Claire lunged toward Noah, slashing at his bindings with trembling hands until he was free, the two of them collapsing into each other as Burrow was dragged down by Newman security and Sienna shrieked with a feral rage that echoed through the rafters, her eyes locked on Claire with a promise that this wasn't the end, that blood would bind them whether she liked it or not, and as she was hauled away, screaming of Ashland's return, Claire realized that though they had survived the night, the true war had only just begun, because if Ashland was alive, if he had been lurking in the shadows all this time, then Sienna and Burrow were merely the first wave of a storm designed to shatter the Newmans from within, and in that moment Claire understood that her choice hadn't ended the nightmare, it had lit the fuse for something even darker, a reckoning that would leave Genoa City trembling once the ghost of Ashland Locke finally stepped back into the light. The warehouse rescue was supposed to be the end of it, a moment of relief where Noah would be safe, Claire would be free from manipulation, and the Newmans could close ranks around one another, but the very next morning Genoa City woke to whispers that proved the nightmare had only grown deeper, because though Burrow was locked behind bars and Sienna Bacall was dragged in chains to a holding cell, she hadn't gone silent, instead, she sat with unnerving calm, her eyes burning with certainty as she told detectives, reporters, and anyone who would listen that the truth was still coming, that Ashland Locke was alive, and that the empire Victor had built was nothing but a house of cards ready to fall, and though most dismissed her words as the ravings of a bitter woman caught in her crimes, the unease inside the Newman family was impossible to ignore, because behind closed doors, Victor's silence was heavier than his denials, his refusal to directly address Sienna's claims setting Nick and Victoria on edge, while Nikki, her hands trembling, admitted that if Sienna was lying, she was doing so with a precision that made the lie indistinguishable from reality, because every detail she had hurled at them lined up with faint memories, unexplained gaps, and old whispers that Nikki herself had buried, and as the family argued, their unity splintered, with Summer still pointing the finger at Claire, Victoria wavering between maternal sympathy and icy suspicion, and Nick caught between defending his daughter's courage and fearing she was forever tainted by Sienna's blood, leaving Claire stranded once again in the eye of a storm she hadn't created, her chest heavy with guilt not just for Noah's kidnapping but for the gnawing sense that Sienna's words about Ashland might not be madness at all but prophecy, because late at night,